And welcome back to our next edition of the CBB Review Studio podcast. I am Dan Siegel, joined by my co-host Ben Anderson. We are here live on Saturday morning. We have cut down our bracket from 68 to 32. The last time we have spoken, I think both of us have pretty much just been nonstop locked into the March Madness games for a vast majority of these last 2 days, Thursday and Friday. Ben, how's it going?
It's going great. I mean, we're in the best weekend of the sports calendar all year, so I'm happy to be here, happy to talk games, and happy that we got a really intriguing set of matchups going into the round of 32.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about each of the four regions, the takeaways quickly from the round of 64, and then the preview for the round of 32. This is going to be a shorter episode. We'll have a longer one after the weekend discussing everything, but as far as just general takeaways before we get into the regions, I wanted to just read you off some of the major conference records from the first rounds and see if we have takeaways from that. So Pac-12 is 5-0, Big East 3-0, as expected there. ACC 4-1, Big Ten 4-2, Big 12 5-3, Mountain West 3-4, SEC 3-5. So everybody likes to talk about the Mountain West and their struggles in March. Honestly, relative to their seeds, they did pretty much as expected, I would say, 3-4 around 500. So I don't think there's a big storyline there. But I want to just give a pat on the back to the ACC, who a lot of people have been kind of tearing them apart the regular season, the last 3 to 4 years, in fact. And once again, they get it done early in March. 4-1 record, the only one being that brutal Virginia loss, which we don't really have to talk about, but 4-1 for the ACC. All four of the people in the round of the teams in the round of 64 advancing to the round of 32.
Yeah, it's been a great season or the great tournament for the ACC so far. One interesting point about the Mountain West is that you mentioned the seed relevance to their overall record, and I do wonder if that means that the committee just actually seeded the Mountain West teams correctly. Right, there was a lot of stuff going around about, the Mountain West is seated too low and all that. They probably would have had a worse – I think they may have had a worse performance relative to their seed expectations if they were seated the way that everyone wanted them to be seated, if that makes sense, right? Because they're playing a little bit – they would be playing easier teams, but they'd probably be around 500 yet again, and then everyone would get a little bit more up in arms. But that's just an interesting part there. The ACC – had the real interesting game. The two interesting games are actually the 6 and 11 seeds with Clemson, New Mexico, an MWC ACC matchup that Clemson just destroyed, unlike everyone thought was going to happen. Of course, right? They're the only that was the 1-11 seed everyone picked to go pretty far, and then that was the 1-11 seed to lose in the first round. Yeah. That was a little fortunate for my bracket. And then NC State, how about them? You never really know when a team gets on this run, right, and wins their auto bid, how they're going to do in the tournament. They could do really well, or they could be like Georgetown, right? Are you Oregon State that goes to the Elite Eight, or are you Georgetown that gets shellacked by Colorado, right? There's two options there, and NC State and Oregon both proved their worth. Shout out to the Pac-12 too. Maybe they're a little bit better than people are expecting.
Yeah, it's true. 5-0. Yeah. And as far as the upsets are concerned, I think honestly, I'm not upset about this, but the fact that there are a lot more of chalky results than the last few years. I think the fact that we didn't have a 16-1 and 15-2 this year for the first time in actually 3 years, that being the case, is okay, because the 15-2, the 16-1s, we want to keep those special, and if they happen every single year, Matt has said this, it's just not as special, and it's become numb to it. But yeah, we did also have a 14-3 for the first time in 3 years, and you were right. The 11-6, 3 out of 4 of them, but the one we expected didn't happen. The last point, no official buzzer beaters in the first round, which is a little bit disappointing. I think the closest we got was that Colorado-Florida game, which was an absolute banger of a game. 102-100 was the final, and Colorado scored a go-ahead basket in the final seconds, but no official buzzer beaters. We'll have something coming, maybe today, but
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
seen a lot of comments around Twitter and other college basketball news saying this is a below average March Madness first round. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. So one is the windows haven't been all that great. They've either been fantastic or nothing is going on. Like the early evening window yesterday with like the Purdue game, the Charleston Alabama game, there was just not a lot going on. The late Friday window was great, but the early Friday evening window, not great. However, then you had some fantastic ones like Colorado, Florida, and Yale Auburn going down to the wire at the exact same time. You better have a dual screen for that, right? And then the other reason I think is that there's been more bad basketball played in this
Yeah.
tournament than it I
Yeah.
feel like. Some of the games are just super ugly. But I'm personally of the opinion that I would rather have 3 or 4 absolute bangers from the first round and then have a lot of bad basketball. I'd rather have games that I remember for years than just everything being slightly above average, but nothing stuck out to you in particular.
Yeah. Good point on the bad basketball. We watched UVA Colorado State in the first 4. That was far from the exception. There was a lot of teams in the teens in the first half, the low 20s. But we also had some decent games, some decent gameplay. Let's get into the actual specific results. So we'll go region by region, starting with the East as we're going to pull up here. And Ben, I'll throw it to you. Just what is your takeaway from the games in this matchup or in this region? We'll start with the round of 64 results.
Yeah, so I think that 2 games out here stick out to me in particular. Of course, the first is Auburn Yale. Auburn was such a polarizing team heading into March Madness because if you love computers, if you love Ken Palm, stuff like that, you thought, man, this might be the pick to go to the national championship game even. And this matchup with UConn in the Sweet 16 could be really interesting. But we've been talking about this all season, how the Tigers just haven't like actually beat anyone yet. And I didn't think the loss would come this early to Yale, especially given the way Yale played in the Ivy League championship game, where they basically took the game away, stole the game away from Brown in the last seconds. But Janai Broom had a fantastic game, and no one else really helped him out, which was unfortunate. I think Broom is a little bit underappreciated nationally, actually, as a player. He's been fantastic this year. I think he was a third-team All-American, but he could have made an argument for higher. But yeah, shout out to Yale, shout out to James Jones. First win for Yale since I believe the 2016 game against Baylor, and then second win in a row for the Ivy League. So great things happening over in the Northeast.
Yeah, not too much like unexpected results here. The besides Yale, I mean, we could talk quickly about Duquesne and then taking down BYU. Final score 71-67. I was not expecting this from the A10's technical tournament champion. Dayton also moving on, so good for them. But yeah, I mean, Duquesne had a really good game plan. You know, BYU is that team that's going to jack up a bunch of threes, and they went 8 for 24. So probably pretty close to a season low 3-point attempts number for BYU. Duquesne just did a really good job running them off the 3-point line. Keith Dambrot will continue to be coaching because he is the Duquesne coach. He is going to retire after this tournament. So one more game at least for him. And they will be playing Illinois in the second round. Tough task for them. Any thoughts on that game?
Yeah, BYU just shot just 14 of 33 from 2-point range. That's not going to get it done fairly often, especially in the NCAA tournament, but against any team as well. And they were always going to be a tough team to pick because it can be so hot and so cold. We have a lot of teams like that in the NCAA tournament this year. But Duquesne, like you said, came out with a game plan. They might have been riding off their victory from the A10 tournament title, and I'm excited to see them against Illinois, which pulled out a win against Morehead State. I do want to touch quickly on the 7, 10, and 8, 9 games because I think we were both pretty interesting. Northwestern FAU was bad basketball. And I don't think anyone's going to say otherwise, especially in the first half. There was a strange play at the end of the regulation where John L. Davis doesn't seem to know how much time is left on the clock and sort of dribbles it up slowly, even though there's 5 seconds left in the game. But good for Northwestern. Ryan Langborg had a big game. Sort of took over what we thought Boo Buie was going to do. And I'll be interested to see if Buie can make his name or Langborg against UConn in the next round. And then Drake, Washington State. Yeah, this was one of the toughest games for me to pick in the entire bracket because they're just two teams that you never really know who's going to step up. You think it'd be Tucker DeVries. Tucker DeVries actually didn't have a good game over in the round of 64, but Washington State, it's very exciting for them. First win since 2008, I believe, in the tournament, so I wanted to shout them out there.
Iowa State also looked really good against South Dakota State. Both the 1 and the 2 seed looked particularly good. I want to, I don't think Washington State is the team that will pose much of a threat to Iowa State. I think they win by double digits in this one as well. UConn just ran some pretty stuff. I'm not overly concerned about Northwestern taking them down, although we talked about this in the original preview. Northwestern took Purdue to overtime twice, so they could play with the best guys, but I just don't think the matchup is too good against UConn. I don't know. What are you quickly looking for in these round of 32 matchups?
I think it's going to be pretty chalk. I'll be honest. I don't see a ton of upset potential in any of the 4 seeds, and me saying that now guarantees that at least one of the 1, 2, 3, or 5 are going to go down. But I'm not sure which one you can point to and say that is the one that I'm worried about. If it's anything, it's probably Yale over San Diego State, to be honest, just because we saw them, the Aztecs, struggle a little bit scoring the ball against UAB. It was really Jaden Ledee or nothing in that game for San Diego State. So I do wonder if someone like Polakaitis can get hot again from the 3-point range, or even August Mahoney, someone that didn't play their best game. What does that look like for the Bulldogs in that round of 32 matchup?
I don't know. I like Duquesne. I like Duquesne over Illinois to be the most likely worse seed to be the better seed. J.J. Grant he looked really good. He had 19. They just came really prepared and they played really well defensively. So I think they might have.
I'm cheering for Duquesne. I'm cheering for Duquesne because I have BYU in my Elite Eight, so I need everyone to.
There you go. I think that Illinois is a tough offense to defend, but they might have a plan. Yeah. We'll see. I'm excited to check out what exactly that plan would be. But moving on to the next region, we're going to talk about the Midwest region, where looking at these, I mean, the first thing that stands out to me is that Kansas-Samford game. I think we have to talk about that. This was very late at night, but everybody, if you did not watch it at night, I'm sure you found out in the morning. Kansas was up by 1. Nick Timberlake, of all people, with a breakaway dunk, and I think there was about 10, 15 seconds left in the game, and Timberlake goes up for the dunk, and he gets blocked, an extremely clean block, but the ref blows the whistle. I don't know what happened. Maybe he panicked. Maybe he anticipated, called it a foul, and instead of Samford being down 1 with a transition opportunity to take the lead, instead Timberlake nails his 2 free throws. Samford has to take a desperation 3, and they lose. It's tough. It's tough. I obviously I think we both had Samford winning this game. I definitely did. I think Kansas really has a tough matchup against Gonzaga just because Samford successfully exhausted them after being down 21 points in the second half and then coming back. Kansas has a very short rotation. They're not built to win 2 games in 3 days necessarily, especially hard-fought games. But just I don't know. I think of the bad calls, the poor officiating, that really stood out over anything else, and it really got a lot of attention nationally.
Yeah, I don't want to harp too much on the officiating, but it has felt very inconsistent at best over the NCAA tournament. I feel like I've been watching different games and they're officiated in completely different ways. And it's very hard to prepare if you're a team on how much physicality you think that they're going to allow. And I wish that there was more standard levels of that across all games. But yeah, this was a bad call. It doesn't mean that Samford would have won. It doesn't mean, but they would have had the chance to win at least more than what they ended up having, which was, a standard end of game free throw contest by the Jayhawks. Good for Kansas to get out. I think everyone was really predicting them to fall in the first round, especially after we saw McCullough going out, but they pulled it together. Samford did shoot 13 from 23 from the free throw line. I think that was a pretty big theme across first round of games, not a ton of great free throw shooting. Yale in particular stood out to me. They were missing left and right, and they still were able to come out with a win. But that's something to be looking for going forward in the round of 32 games. On the other hand, how about Gonzaga? Everyone came in. McNeese State's going to win. McNeese State has this power conference talent. They have Will Wade, great coach, right? And Gonzaga just crushed them. I think that it was a tough matchup for McNeese on the inside. They don't really have anyone that could guard EK or Anton Watson. But Nolan Hickman had a fantastic game, so we want to give him credit there as well. He's been very up and down so far this season. But the Bulldogs are moving on to the round of 32 with about as favorable of a matchup as you could ask for, I think, if you're Mark Few.
Let's talk about that bottom part of the bracket, or bottom part of the region as well. So we have Texas, Colorado State, where Texas came out pretty much cooking. I mean, Colorado State just couldn't do anything offensively. They looked like they possessed the team that they played in the first four in Virginia, and there were shots being taken at us left and right. So Twitter was fun this week. But then Texas will be playing against Tennessee, who smoked St. Peter's, left no doubt in that one. So that's good to see from my projected champion. That's going to be an interesting matchup. I think I favor Tennessee because when it comes down to it, they just offer a lot more. But we've seen Texas get hot offensively, and Max Abmas is just a winner in March.
Yeah, in the Rick Barnes Bowl, I don't think you can ever count Max Abmas out. It'll be interesting. I just don't think Texas has quite enough firepower outside of him and maybe Dylan DeSue to compete with, say, if Dalton Connect goes off, right? I think that's wraps for the Longhorns there. But it'll be an interesting game, at least in the beginning, to keep an eye on. One thing I want to say real quick before we talk about these next brackets or these next matchups is that I don't think South Carolina's loss should be a referendum on how good they were this season. Typically, if you look back, a pattern is that if you're a year early, right, if you're overachieving based on what everyone thought you were going to do, typically you don't perform as well in the NCAA tournament. That's just a trend that has been going on for the past decade. So it's not something to be concerned about if you're a Lamont Paris, a South Carolina fan at all. They still had a fantastic season and will probably have one next year as a lot of people are coming back. But shout out to Oregon, shout out to Jermaine Couisnard going off for 40 against his former team. The Ducks are dangerous. We talked about them in the preseason. They had a lot of high potential. They never always lived up to it in the regular season, but no one really wants to play Oregon and Dana Altman in this round of 32 matchup.
No, I can't wait because Creighton, they had the answer for Enrique Freeman, who started the game by just nailing 3 threes, but then Kalkbrenner just used his length, and Creighton as we predicted, some like Akron would have some element of success offensively, but Creighton just doesn't stop scoring. This Oregon Creighton game might be the best game of the round of 32. And then before we move on to the next region, shout out to Kansas. I know controversial way to end the game, but I think I saw something in the double digits in terms of consecutive years going to the round of 32. So, or maybe consecutive tournaments, but still, like they of the era of first round upsets, it hasn't been Kansas. So, shout out to Bill.
I mean, for sure, they had their streak in like the 2000s where they would lose to like Bucknell and all them, but Self has figured something out. So, good for him.
All right, next region, the South, and what do we want to talk about first here? There's a couple topics of conversation. We talked about NC State, Texas Tech already. I guess I'll apologize to Duke because Duke, Vermont, I thought that Vermont would have some amount of just toughness and be able to exploit Duke for some of their deficiencies. But I guess I overestimated their athleticism and kind of underestimated the athleticism gap between these two teams because Duke clearly looked like Duke and Vermont looked like an America East team playing Duke, and Duke took care of business. I think the final score was something along the lines of like 63-47 or something like that. So
I know I can't believe I had to defend Duke, right? To on the pod on live, like with my face attached to it. But yeah, I just think this wasn't one of Vermont's best teams, and they probably could have been a 14 seed if we're being completely honest. But I have a question to pose to you about this about this region. So I think that you can make an argument for two games being the best game of the round of 64. They're both in this region. One is Kentucky, Oakland, and one is Florida, Colorado. For me, I think I know what you would pick as the best game, but I think I'm going to go opposite you. So for me, Kentucky, Oakland was the game of the entire first round here, because first of all, you had everything surrounded. It's more context based than Florida, Colorado is, because everything surrounding Coach Cal and what he can achieve with the class. Like for years we were hearing, just wait for the 2023 recruiting class. This is the year that's going to bring Cal back to the Final Four. This is the year that's going to bring, Kentucky back to what it should be, I guess you could say. And then you have a man named Jack Golke come in and just ruin that for everyone. 10 of 20 from 3-point range, 32 points total, 0 2-point attempts, excuse me. Just an absolute star in the making. This is what you live for if you watch college basketball, is to watch him. And Dan, of course, you got a little Twitter famous over the past couple of days with a tweet describing what his performance was like. But it's just, this is a fascinating offseason for Kentucky. It wasn't as if they were even defending all that badly. He just made shots. Like he was just making.
I said weeks ago, I said, if there's going to be this double digit, like 14, 13 seed that's going to be Kentucky, it's going to be a team that's going to cut them, like do a lot of like cutting and a lot of action and just backdoor, beat them at the rim and just basically out scheme them. And that's not what happened. They just splashed a million threes in their face. So
they just lost. It's so strange. Antonio Reeves had a great performance. Dillingham and Shepard did not have good performances. So you could sort of pin it there. They were also just missing a ton of 8-footers, 12-footers against Oakland's zone as well. I think that threw them off a little bit. They couldn't necessarily rely on blow-by athleticism from their guards. But, man, congrats to Oakland. Congrats to Greg Kampe, first tournament win ever. And I'm excited to see this matchup. It's very sad that we're going to have to see one of Jack Golke or DJ Burns leave so early in the NCAA tournament, which we could put them against, other competition in the second round. So maybe both of them have a chance to get to the second weekend. But here we are. I'm excited to see that game. And congrats again to the Golden Grizzlies.
4 great matchups here, by the way. So Houston A&M might be the most intriguing to me. Actually, first off, we talked about Duke, so just quickly, JMU, Wisconsin. I think this was the most predictable 12/5 upset of all time. Just the most intriguing, undervalued 12 seed against the most struggling, fraudulent 5 seed. So JMU now plays Duke. The Duke's against Duke. That'll be a fun matchup. But I'm looking at the top here, Houston versus A&M. Interesting matchup, right? Because, okay, A&M made double-digit threes in the first half against Nebraska. That's not going to happen again. A&M is not a good shooting team, but they could really muck up this game and pose a threat to Houston. Maybe what might not be the most entertaining watch, but I'd be worried if I were a Houston fan.
I don't know, man. I disagree with you here. I just think they don't have the offensive firepower. I know what they just did, right, against Nebraska, but Nebraska's Nebraska. And Houston, you're coming in and playing the best defense in the country. So that's something I just worry about. I think you have to be a certain type of team to beat Houston. I'm not sure Texas A&M is that type of team. But going down to the bottom four teams down here, Florida, Colorado, like we said, fantastic game, back and forth, 100 points for each team in regulation. It's just a different sport at this point. I feel like college basketball is, where this is possible, because I felt like 3 or 4 years ago you're not seeing these types of points being scored. So definitely happy that the offensive shot making, the offensive efficiency has become more prevalent in college basketball. It makes it a little bit more entertaining of a product to watch. Walter Clayton led a comeback that nearly worked against the Buffaloes here, but KJ Simpson, like you mentioned, had that go-ahead shot. Was it a push-off? Maybe. I don't think I would have called it. In a vacuum, it's probably not a foul call, but Florida was fighting with the refs all game long. Todd Golden got a tech for it at some point. Alex Condon had fouled out already. And yeah, I get it if you're a Gators fan, why that is the last straw.
gosh, they were missing him locked in. Like obviously they were missing him.
Bad.
They were like really missing him. Like the physicality, the presence that he would offer the interior defense, they just had none of it. Lampkin was cooking, and I'm excited. He might have a similar favorable matchup against Marquette. I mean,
yeah,
you have Oso Ighodaro. That's going to be a really good matchup of the bigs. I'm not a big fan of Oso offensively, even though he scores a bunch, but Lampkin's offense versus Oso's defense, I can't wait to watch that.
Yeah, Colorado's a funny team because all 5 of their starters scored more than double digits. I believe at least 12 in the game against Florida. And then their 6th man is Cody Williams, who's a projected lottery pick, right? So you have this interesting mix of talent that may be able to give Marquette some problems. Like if you're looking for an 8 over 9 or a 1 seed or a 2 seed to lose in the second round, Marquette's probably the most likely. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Maybe North Carolina. You can make the argument for North Carolina just because it's Tom Izzo, but I think given the other, yeah.
So you want to move on now because we just alluded.
Yeah, we can move on. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So North Carolina, Michigan State, and we'll talk about these first round games. But there's nothing about this Michigan State team in particular. I said this on the original preview pod too. Nothing about this Michigan State team in particular that leads me to believe they're going to beat North Carolina or even have a chance to beat North Carolina. But just something about this program and Tom Izzo being their coach, they're just always pulling something. They're always pulling something. And we even saw that in the first round against Mississippi State. They always got something up their sleeve. So history does tend to repeat itself. I know it's really hard to make generalizations about March Madness, but what are you making of that?
I think it'll be a great game to watch. I would suspect that North Carolina wins. I just think they have a little bit too much offensive firepower. Whereas, sometimes Michigan State is Tyson Walker or bust here, but they made it interesting, and that's all we can ask for a round of 32 matchup, especially involving a 1 seed. I do want to talk about Grand Canyon and Alabama as a matchup. That's one I find very intriguing. Grand Canyon defeated St. Mary's in the round of 64. St. Mary's just shot less than 50% at the rim, not even 2-point shots total, but at the rim in particular, just because of the Lopes' fantastic front court, right? You have the defensive studs. They look like high majors there, whether it's McLaughlin or Duke Brennan or other enforcers at the rim. So it's very interesting because if Alabama isn't able to shoot like they did against Charleston, where they just bomb them from 3-point range, they don't necessarily have the ease at which they can get to the rim in the same way that they did against the Cougars, where it just was unstoppable, their type of play.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. And we've seen Alabama games in the regular season where they shoot low 30s, high 20s from 3 with their high volume and still win because they could get to the rim. But I don't know. I think transition might be a big factor, just literally beating them down the court. But I agree. I think it just comes down to, do they make their threes? Do they not? Alabama shoots an incredible high volume of 3-point shots. So that's that matchup. Shout out Clemson.
Yeah.
Everybody loved New Mexico over Clemson as an 11-6. New Mexico was like 3-point favorites, 2.5-point favorites, something like that. And Clemson just straight up won. New Mexico, we've seen these performances in the regular season where just nothing's going their way. They can't get anything on offense, can't buy a bucket, and they tend to just chuck up shots and take just really poor shot selection. And Jalen House gets flustered, frustrated, and everything just kind of builds upon itself. But shout out to Clemson for forcing that to happen. And we'll see. Baylor hasn't been the team that's necessarily taken care of games that, like, do we know what the point spread is on this Clemson Baylor game? Do we have one yet?
I believe it was something like 8.5 maybe, which sounds about right. Given how Baylor destroyed Colgate. Unfortunately, yeah. This wasn't the year for upsets because a lot of the teams that are standards like Vermont, Colgate, even Charleston, they just didn't have their best teams this year. And you sort of saw that in the way some teams just crushed in the first round that not necessarily may have been the case in previous years.
maybe it's just the programs though. Like Colgate and Vermont, I feel like they fall into the category. They always win their poor conferences, and then they never really pose much of a threat to the team. We always think they might, and then they don't. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I the spread is indeed 8.5. I like Clemson against that spread. I don't think I'm confident in them winning that game, but you've said it a lot. Baylor just they always seem to let teams back into games. They don't close. I mean, Colgate's just a vastly inferior team to them, but that might be a good play. I don't know what the spread is officially, so don't quote me on that. And Dayton over Nevada, another A10 team winning. I don't know what my takeaway is on that. I know. Like, I guess I kind of proved you right there, but
Nevada.
I proved you wrong. Proved you wrong. Myself right, I should say.
Yeah, Nevada sold this so hard. They were up 17.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dayton's usually on the wrong side of those kind of games.
But here we are, right? Man, that one kills me because I really thought Nevada was going to win, and they were winning, and then they just fell apart. Sort of like they did to Cincinnati when Musselman was a coach a little while ago. But yeah, this is an interesting matchup: Dayton versus Arizona. Arizona, this feels like somewhere that they can lose. Just to be quite honest, Deron Holmes is a talented enough player to where they can give them issues, maybe get ball into foul trouble, things like that. So I'm looking forward to that game a little bit overall.
Yeah. Ben, by the way, I think your camera might be frozen. I could hear you.
Yeah, I am frozen. I'm just gonna speak until I can hear you, or I can't hear you anymore, and then we'll go from there.
All right, word. But yeah, I mean that's really it. I think Dayton, Arizona could be interesting. I had Nevada over Arizona. Now, I haven't really had time to process all these matchups too much because it's very fresh news. But it's going to be a pretty good battle of bigs again in there. Deron Holmes and Umar Ballo.
Yeah, absolutely.
Two very different types of bigs as well. If Arizona wants to win, yeah, what do you have to say?
It feels like chalk to me. A lot of this team, it feels like chalk.
Yeah, because I feel like Arizona has the defense, the enough length and enough of athletes. They're going to be able to close out and kind of take away the inside out game that Dayton does like to play, and then at that point they might have one of their poor offensive performances, but Michigan State, UNC, watch out for that one. That's what I'm going to say.
Yeah, absolutely.
For no reason other than Tom Izzo in March.
We're going to have a couple of games. I think a lot of these games are actually going to not be very close. Not just in the West, but overall. But we're going to have a couple games in this region, in this round of 32, that you're going to remember for a few years. And I think that's all you can ask every round.
All right. Well, that will do it for today's episode. We will have a full first weekend recap and second weekend preview coming up, most likely Monday night. So stay tuned for that. This was just kind of a quick mini, episode where we were going to just do it in between and quickly get you guys live. But thank you so much for watching. Be sure to follow us on the socials. You can see them scrolling along the bottom of the screen throughout the podcast, and subscribe to YouTube if you have not already. Thank you guys again for watching and listening, and take